Cinema Classics is sponsored by the Gateway Film Center and is produced by John DeSando and Johnny DiLoretto. Listen to shows online at WCBE.org. I'm John DeSando.
I'm Johnny DiLoretto.
This is Cinema Classics.
Yeah.
A classic, and I think it's time for us, after the Oscars,
Yeah.
to look at maybe the most influential movie of all time.
This movie comes up so often in movie nerd conversations, and it's always very divisive. It's not divisive among cinephiles.
Right.
It's divisive among general movie-going people who are always asking the question, what is so great about Citizen Kane?
And you know, it's a great question, and it's one that I want to ask you.
Well, I think people go to it, and then it's not a pleasing movie.
Ah, good.
You know what I mean? I think people
word.
like hear it's so great, and they expect to be moved by it.
Yes.
Like in a way you might be moved by a classic film like It's a Wonderful Life, or they think it's going to be like really funny or satirical, like the Philadelphia Story. So it's not that. It is not a. It's not meant to do that. It's a different kind of movie.
Whenever I recommend it to someone, I tell them it's not going to be your favorite movie.
Yeah.
The adjective we're using is influential. So what do you think is influential about Citizen Kane?
Well, structure. First of all, narrative structure. When we, remember how earth-shattering Pulp Fiction was in 1994 because it jumped back and forth in time.
Yes.
Citizen Kane did that. Orson Welles did that 50 years before that movie. The movie jumps back and forth. Number one. Number two is the different styles of filmmaking that he uses. Right out of the gate, you got this kind of looks like a horror film, and then you go into the newsreel section, and then you got a character study, and then you got that's the other thing, the photography, the cinematography, the deep focus stuff.
Which many of his tricks had been done before, but nobody ever put them together the way he did.
The way the film is assembled.
Yeah.
Later on in the 70s, we got what we called character studies. I don't know how often we saw that kind of movie before, where a movie took a figure and then just kind of explored the character itself, as opposed to, putting all the emphasis on the story.
Right. You mentioned the structure of it, and as you look back to the ancient Greeks, they were pretty linear. Started here, ended there.
Mm-hmm.
Start with happy, end with sad.
Right.
And all of a sudden he jumps in the first 5 minutes, he gives you the whole story.
Yeah, right.
I mean, he was just violating what we
don't
thought.
forget the little brilliant mystery move there that he puts in, right? So now you have this visually dynamic cinematography, right? The jumping back and forth. Now you have this element of a mystery. What is this all about?
Right.
What is this Rosebud business?
Right. And he said himself he wasn't that exercised about the Rosebud thing.
Yeah,
People picked up on
it, right? It became it just adds it adds a layer of investigation, kind of.
Oh yeah, and then to add to that, in the opening sequences, it's reported that his last word was Rosebud,
Mm-hmm.
when in fact nobody heard it.
Right, because the nurse walks out.
Right,
Right?
she's
But
not there.
that's also that's another really brilliant sort of thing.
He's playing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how cocky he is. He's in his mid-20s.
Yeah.
And he has never made a film before. But smart, brilliant. He gets the best cinematographer in Hollywood, Greg Toland, to come in and help him. And within a week, he's got it.
Yeah. And then his the screenwriter, Mankiewicz.
Oh, Mank.
Right? Mank So you got great writing going on. You've got this just guy shot out of a cannon, excited young filmmaker.
Oh, yes.
You know, Orson Welles, hot off of all his Mercury Theater successes on radio and on stage.
Yeah.
Coming to Hollywood, coming out west, and shaking things up. People didn't like it. He, you know, made a lot of enemies very quickly.
Yeah.
And the movie was critically well received.
Yes.
It did not perform well at the box office. It was critically well received. I think it got actually Oscar nominations and stuff.
Well,
like
it got
that.
Best Screenplay.
It did get
Best Screenplay.
Setting the example for for years to come, wherein the best film
Right.
is often just given the Best Screenplay award, because it just is not a warm movie. It's not a movie about you know, it doesn't have this reassuring humanitarian message to it.
And you mentioned how he stirred things up, and did have quite a few people who were just jealous of him because he was such a cocky genius.
Yeah.
And here, though some probably saw it, many knew it was a great film. Many didn't know. As those things are, it takes a while for you to say, this is a work of genius. It just takes a while.
It takes other filmmakers looking at a movie and being astonished by it,
Sure.
and wondering how things were done, right? And those filmmakers start to look at a film like that, and it begins to influence their own works, which begins to really sort of trickle down. It's like the trickle-down theory of cinematic influence. I want to hit on one thing. You said this movie is like Orson Welles playing.
Yes.
And I think maybe that is the best way, if you've never seen Citizen Kane, if you're like, I gotta see it, you know, if you have this idea like it's a chore, like, or you're angry about why people consider it to be, just let all of that go and approach it that way.
Yes.
Approach it as, this movie is so much fun. It is a lot of fun when you start looking at how he did the shots and where the story's going to jump and what Rosebud is all about and all that stuff. It's just a fun movie.
Oh yeah, and you know, he was having fun. I mean, he was going nose to nose with William Randolph Hearst, not small potatoes. This was a big publisher of newspapers.
Yeah,
and
very influential guy.
He was satirizing him, his relationship with Marion Davies, the comic screen actress. And so I can almost see Welles just enjoying himself. And I think, along with your comments, the place in the film that best encapsulates that playfulness that we were talking about is when he walks into the newspaper office.
Yeah.
When he says, I think it'd be fun to run a newspaper.
Yeah.
In fact, I have engaged Tammy Shepard, who is a local artist, to do a portrait of Welles for me, for my living room. He's influential to me as well. And it's going to be that moment. That moment.
What is it about that moment and that character and that figure that you want to look at every day?
Yes. What it is here's a person of genius who has probably not even an idea yet how a genius he is, but putting himself out there, steamrolling his way through Hollywood to make something that turns out to be the best thing that was ever made on film. I mean, I love this. I love the fact that he's a young, cocky, young guy.
You love the where Welles and Kane kind of come together.
Oh, I absolutely do. And it's a great
character.
Point. You know what I even love? As you see him at the newspaper, and you get a full shot of him, he looks so dashing. And yet he's wearing a girdle.
You know, I never. Yeah, right.
I mean,
he's an interesting looking guy when he was like thinner like that.
Yes.
But it is interesting, kind of how, in some ways, Welles' career mirrored Citizen
yes.
Kane.
Oh, yeah.
But not in the way that you think, though. You know, he was never as powerful or as rich as Kane was, but his fortunes, you know, his artistic fortunes, rose and fell.
Yeah.
And that is a really kind of another layer.
Yes.
That adds some, you know, element of depth to it.
Most people remember him as the fat guy chewing on a cigar and promoting coffee.
Or the voice of Optimus Prime in the 80s Transformers.
Right. And yet in fact, he went on to make such films as Magnificent Ambersons, which some people think is better than Citizen Kane.
Well, they think it
changed.
would have been better if the studio hadn't sabotaged it.
I know.
He was off filming a documentary, a color extravaganza documentary about the Rio de Janeiro, the Mardi Gras, and while he was gone, they took the footage of Magnificent Ambersons, recut it, and then under the orders of the studio, Robert Wise, who went on to direct movies like West Side Story, was ordered to burn the negatives so he could never put it together.
Well, they changed it to a happy ending. Wells did not have a happy ending.
Well, they changed it into all that exists is 88 minutes of it.
You know, I can recommend to our listeners not only seeing Citizen Kane, and this is for people who care enough about movies to see maybe the most influential movie of all time.
Yeah.
You know, that's where I would recommend. And I think you're quite right to caution them. This is not going to be your favorite film.
If we could distill it into one phrase, have fun with Citizen Kane.
Yes, right. And also to have fun, because we're always here to tip off our listeners, the San Simeon Castle in California, between Los Angeles and San Francisco, which is the old Hearst Castle, is one of the best tourist attractions you will ever see. And in fact, it takes you 2 days to see it.
Wow.
That's how big.
Wow.
And Hearst never finished fixing up that castle.
Wow.
Isn't that something?
That is amazing.
No, I love it. See, life, movies,
Art.
Good.